Charlamagne the God has weighed in on the Joe Rogan scandal, talked about it on The Breakfast Club. He has some interesting comments here. Let's take a look, and then we'll react.
I mean, listen, if you've been in this business long enough as a broadcaster, you said something stupid. You said something that would be deemed problematic at some point. But when those things come back up, what can you do?
You gotta apologize and take accountability for.
Like I always say, you can't tell folks what to be mad at. Like just because your intent wasn't malicious or your intent wasn't to offend, we can't tell folks how to react to the words that come out of your mouth. So you just got to deal with whatever comes your way when you say what you want. But I do want to know, what do folks want to happen? Like when these old sound bites come out, right? You know, he apologized for them. What do you want to happen? Because this isn't the first time and won't be the last time, you know, we hear a white person using the N-word in context, out of context, quoting rappers, quoting comedians, whatever it is. So what do you want to happen next?
With just Joe Rogan or in general?
Joe Rogan or just in general? Because this can happen to anybody at any given time if you've been in this business long enough. Broadcaster, rapper, comedian.
Like you said, you can't control how people react. So you work for a private company. They're going to make the decision ultimately on what they decide to do. So they pulled some of the episodes, but they're still standing by him. And I think
they should, because they knew all of this was before he even did the deal. So they knew that.
And then people have a right to be offended. I'm going to be honest, I've never listened to an episode of Joe Rogan ever.
I have. I listen to Joe
I know
Rogan
you have, but
all the time.
I haven't. So it's hard for me to say an opinion on somebody who I've never.
Yeah,
and that's the other thing.
I don't listen to too many. I've listened a couple of times, but also I don't know him. You know what I mean? And the people that seem like they know him say he's not a racist, say he's a good dude. So, I mean, what do you stand by?
I don't know him personally. I met him twice. You know what I mean? But I don't think he's racist. I've done his show. I met him at my man Andrew Schultz's wedding. I don't think he's a racist.
But can you say racist things and not be racist?
But I do think it's wild that if you look at like Joe Rogan and then you say, okay, well they just scrubbed his old episodes, and then
some of them, not a lot. There's a lot of episodes.
Then you look at somebody like Whoopi Goldberg who gets suspended for 2 weeks.
Hold on, you said something that's very important just now.
Can
you say racist things and not be racist? Depending, right? Because you can say a slur, right? You can say a gay slur and not be homophobic, be homo ignorant.
Correct.
Because a lot of times when we used to use that gay slur back in the day, it wasn't in reference to somebody's sexuality, right?
That's true. That's
you
facts.
know? So, yeah.
Yeah, look, I'm guilty of the exact same thing, man. So what they're referencing there at the end is, you know, I'm 34 years old, back when we were in high school, even in college, it was very common to say things that, in retrospect, now we'd all look at as that's homophobic. Don't do that. But we didn't use the words in a homophobic sense, but we used the words. It was very common to say, like, gay. You say that. FAG, people would say. And that's like, the culture has changed and society has changed. We don't do that now. I don't do that now. But there was a time we did that, but it would be flat out dishonest to ignore the context and pretend like every time somebody said FAG or gay, that what they're saying is, I don't like gay people, or I think gay people are inferior, or whatever. Because that is not the context that it was used in at all. Not even close. That's not, because perfect example is this. I've always been in favor of gay marriage. As long as I can remember, I've always been in favor of gay marriage. Even when, like, seemingly nobody was talking about gay marriage at all. I always thought, well, why shouldn't a gay person be able to marry a gay person if they're in love? Who cares? And so even given that stance that I've always had, even during times when I believed that, we would still use that terminology, like, say, gay or say FAG. Now, again, times have changed. We don't do that now. But I think it's just flat out disingenuous and dishonest to pretend like, you know, if you use that terminology in that context, therefore you're equal to some homophobic bigot who does not support gay people getting married, does not support their rights by any stretch of the imagination, does not support them as a protected class, and have always disliked them or thought it was inferior, or thought it was a sin or whatever. They're just not the same. You could say, I don't like both of those things, fair, but there are differing degrees. And I think in order to be intellectually honest, you have to admit that. And effectively, that's what Charlemagne is admitting here. Charlemagne's like, look, we used it too, and we weren't homophobic because I never had a problem with gay people, but you could say it was like ignorant to use that terminology. I'll take that. You know? So let's go through more of what he says here. At the beginning, he's like, look, we've all said something stupid. You've been in this business long enough. You know, we've all said something stupid and it can be resurfaced. Then he says, you can't tell people what to be mad at. That's true. You can't tell people what to be mad at. I mean, you could try to make an argument for one side or the other, but people are going to react how they're going to react. Then he says, what do people want to happen? I actually think that's an important point because, I mean, I think, and you guys can tell me, you're involved in these debates and discussions as well, but I think some people genuinely want Spotify to kick Rogan off. And it's like, okay, well, let's say they get that. They get their head on the platter that they're asking for. But then what? Because Rumble already offered him $100 million to be exclusive with them. I don't think Joe would go there, but he still got, clips on YouTube. YouTube wouldn't kick him off if he goes back full-time to YouTube. He doesn't have to have a deal with YouTube management, with the company YouTube, but he could just go on YouTube like anybody else. There's a number of other podcast things that would host him. He's not Alex Jones, so, Alex Jones is almost a unique case because of the Sandy Hook thing and because literally all of polite society started despising him. It was almost easy for them to censor and deplatform him and without too much noise. But Joe's not him. And so if you get him off of Spotify, then what? If he goes to YouTube, you do campaign against YouTube, somebody at some point is going to draw the line and be like, no, we don't agree with what Rogan says. In fact, we might even dislike Rogan, but he's allowed to talk. So what do you want? So let's say best case scenario for the people who are crusading against Joe here, he gets kicked off of Spotify, maybe goes back to YouTube, maybe sets up his own site or whatever, and look, maybe he actually loses 10%, 15%, 20% of his audience, which is possible, because sometimes the deplatforming stuff works to one extent or another. Milo's a good example of it. There's been others. But even if he loses 10, 15, 20% of his audience, he's still colossal, and he's not going anywhere. So I don't know, what's the end game is what Charlamagne is asking. And I have the same question. What's the end game? And so it all seems like even if you are really strong on that side of the argument, nothing's going to come of it. Nothing's going to come of it. Then he says, this can happen to anybody at any time. Big difference is Charlamagne says, I think Charlamagne's been on the podcast twice, or I think he said twice, right? And then he said, look, I listen to a show all the time too. And who was that? Angela Yee? One of the other hosts was like, I don't listen to him. Now notice, a huge difference there is the person who listens to him is kind of defending him and the person who doesn't wants to be against him, but she's fair and she doesn't go all in against him. But I do think there is a big divide in this conversation between people who've listened to him, whether every now and then or often, versus people who never listen to him. And the ones who never listen to him are the ones who are most convinced he's basically like David Duke. Now, by the way, there are some people who listen to him and still are like, I hate it, and are on the side of kick him off or punish him or whatever. That exists, but that's a relatively small percentage compared to the people who've watched him. Even if they don't like what he said or agree with him, they're like, what do you want to happen? What do you want to do? So Charlamagne is making a pretty big defense here. And then he gets to a point that I think it's a very nuanced point, and I don't think almost anybody else is making it, which is this. Can you say racist things and not be racist? And Charlamagne's like, yeah, you can. He goes on to say, well, look, it depends. But, I mean, I definitely think that's true. And then he brings up the homophobia point and, he used to use the words, but we didn't mean we don't like gay people. And the war on context is absurd to me. Again, you don't have to like that Rogan said the N-word 22 times. Rogan doesn't like it. I don't think anybody likes it. But you can't say that when he's quoting a comedy bit, or he's reading a quote from somebody, or he's, talking about the word and uses the word versus calling somebody the word. You can't say there's no differences. That's just not true. That's just not accurate. And so it is true you could say racist things and not be racist. And by the way, I think the worst thing Rogan said is not even the N-word in context. And they talk about this further in the clip. You didn't see it there, but it's in the clip. He made a joke one time doing a podcast with Joey Diaz, over a decade ago, where he says, I went to go see Planet of the Apes. I saw it in a black neighborhood. It's like I walked into Planet of the Apes. And so, I mean, that's a racist joke. There's no way around it. What he said there was racist. You know who would miss that? Joe. And literally in the clip right after, he's like, oh, that was racist. Why'd I say that? And so that begs the question, can you say a racist thing and not be racist? And Charlamagne is saying, yeah, I think you can. And I think that's true. Now, what actually constitutes racism? Because that is the question in context here. And I think different people will have different standards. But in my opinion, it's more like the textbook definition of like, you think certain races are inferior and others are superior. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be your own that you think is superior. But anybody who believes in sort of a racial hierarchy, like there's objectively inferior and objectively superior, and that's what you think of it. And he says very clearly, look, I don't think Joe is racist. I mean, you guys can determine, you guys can use your own, reason on this front. But look, I'm in no position to judge anybody given my own history of old tweets. Everybody knows my old tweets, And like, yeah, some of the stuff was stupid, but some of it was just shit posting. And I mean, we're all idiots to one extent or another. The question is, are you actually a racist or a bigot? Do you actually think that people are inherently inferior or superior based on arbitrary characteristics like skin color? And I think that in today's climate, it's just like, if there's any little thing that's off, it's just you're automatically one of the bad people. And look, if you believe that, that's your prerogative, that's totally fine. But, a lot of people out there, they know what they really believe. They know what's in their hearts. So if you try to accuse them of racism or bigotry or whatever, and they don't feel like that, and they're not that, then they're going to say, I think you're wrong. And so I think Charlemagne's comments here were great because they were nuanced, they're complex. He doesn't think Joe's a racist. And he also says, again, really important point, we've all said something stupid. This can happen to anybody at any time. We all say dumb shit, ignorant shit, sometimes racist shit. And the difference is people who own up to it, acknowledge it, admit fault when they think they're wrong, and the people who are genuinely hateful, genuinely bigoted and racist, and maybe, think they never did anything wrong ever. So, again, you can determine what you think is fair and unfair, but certainly I cannot throw stones in the glass house that I've built, and everybody knows I'm in the glass house that I'm in, so take that for what it is. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.